Hi, I'm Stuart Holbrook, president of Theriault.
And I'm Florence Theriault, and we're here to talk to you today about the wonderful Huguette Clarke doll collection.
There really is no figure in the history of doll collecting that has such a deep historical connection to America than Huguette Clarke. It's a story like none other, so much so that it captivated American audiences in about 2012 when the entire expose led by Bill Dedman came out about Huguette's life, not only her current drama centered around states and battles for this fortune, but the unique history that extended so far back that her father was born during the administration of Martin Van Buren, the 8th president in the 1830s, was a grown man during the Civil War, and here was his daughter, a direct descendant of one of the great barons of the 19th and early 20th century, was alive in a hospital during the Obama administration. A truly remarkable story.
1839 into the early 2000s. It's a remarkable piece of story. She really travels the whole scope of American history. To me, that was the most fascinating part about working with this collection.
It was. I mean, the story of Huguette Clarke, a lot of people tended to focus and were drawn into it more because of the drama that centered around the estate and the fact that she had spent her last 20 years in a hospital room. But really, if you read Empty Mansions, the book that was done by Bill Dedman, Pulitzer Prize-winning author, and was on the New York Times bestseller list, you will understand the rich complexity of this woman's life as well as her father's life, but a wonderful glimpse at the sort of rags to riches story of America in the 19th century.
Except Huguette only lived through the riches part of it. And one of the things that I think doll collectors will find most intriguing is, for all intents and purposes, the majority of our doll collecting years begin in the mid-1800s and go on through the mid-1900s, and that's really the span of her collecting years, not her collecting years, but the period of dolls that she collected were during that time. And so it kind of ties in very neatly together.
It really is one of the greatest stories we've ever encountered. We've sold museums before that are linked to collectors. We've sold the collections of great collectors who are sort of luminaries within the doll world, but never a collection of truly a great American heiress that is one of the most unique histories of time. Talk about Huguette Clarke. How did she start collecting dolls?
Well, she always did her entire life. Remember, she was born in Paris in 1906, and 1 year before she was born, what appeared in Paris?
Bleuette.
Bleuette, which became one of the pivotal dolls of the entire 1900s in France and has today extended worldwide as for people collecting it. But she was intrigued with that. She lived in the 16th arrondissement in Paris, and I like to envision this because I spent a lot of time in that arrondissement myself, walking down the Champs-Élysées toward Onambleu, which was the center of so much of her childhood, where she just found this paradise of childhood toys, dolls and toys, and got her on her quest to collect dolls. All her life she had them. And at the end of this video, and the last slot in the catalog, is the one remaining doll from her childhood that we're going to show you. Very, very important.
And it's incredible when you think that here she was sort of at the end of the Jameau reign. She was born, but SFBJ was still prominent. She was there when Albert Mark was creating the Mark doll,
yes,
when the Poubots were popular. All the way up until World War I, she had lived in Paris. Her first years, she only really spoke French in the beginning and had only visited the U.S. a few times. So everything about her early years, formative years, was related to
Stuart, you've
the
recounted
French doll.
That story a couple of times that I've always loved, the one where Americans had been told to leave Paris because the Germans were invading, and the banks were closed, so they had no money to get out.
Bill Dedman tells the story, actually, and it's one of my favorite in the book, that basically they needed to immediately get out of Paris. There was no money to be able to get out of the banks at the time. The Germans were close to Paris at that point. And so the girls remembered that their father had given them all these gold coins over the years in Paris. And so they went into their bags and they pulled all the gold coins, and it was enough to get them out into England.
But ironically, as it turned out, they really needed to evacuate, and they came back a short time later.
Exactly.
All those wasted coins.
Yes.
But there it is, anyway.
But what a remarkable beginning to her story, and how we understand now so intimately the idea of where the doll became such an important part of her life and extended beyond childhood. Even into her teen years in New York, there were recounted moments of restaurants and social gatherings where she would be sitting at the table in the restaurant with her father and mother and other social dignitaries of New York at the time, and she would be sitting very quietly the entire dinner with her Jameau doll.
However, there is one photograph, and I do want to say this. It was done in the 1920s, and I think, because it's kind of not clear in the photograph, that the doll she's holding is a salon doll, which was very fashionable to do at the time. Mm-hmm. If you were a stylish, flapper young lady, you'd go out to eat or out for the evening, and you'd carry your boudoir, your salon doll with you. And there's one of the dolls that we'll be showing you from her collection is to me, one of the nicest of the salon dolls I've ever seen. It's a wonderful harlequin, and it's exactly like one from the SFBJ catalog of that time period. Mm-hmm. So I like to think that's where she acquired it, going back all the way back to her early childhood. So much in trying to piece together her collection as I was preparing this catalog, I tried to tie it into points in her life where I knew where she was. You know, her dolls are fine. They're absolutely extraordinary. But if we look back at some of the early photographs of her, like the one where she's sitting on the porch of the Western home, and the dolls that are on that porch
in Butte,
steps
Montana,
in
her home
Montana.
in Butte, Montana.
And she's sitting on the front steps there with a group of her dolls paraded up alongside of her. And of course, it's hard to tell. The photograph is blurry, but they don't look like they're all the finest, rarest dolls in the world. They look like the kind of dolls that American kids would have been playing with. Yes.
Exactly.
So her love of dolls was not just for the purpose of possessing things that no one else could have, or the best of the best. She really loved dolls.
They were her friends.
And I think as you look at this collection, that will become very, very evident to you. One of the things we're not showing today, but became very obvious as I was working on the collection, was that her passion for the dolls extended throughout the dolls that were being created in the 1900s, so that she went into the collecting of the German cloth dolls made by Edith Van Apps, known as Baps dolls, I was very unfamiliar with these till I started to work on them. These are wonderful little cloth works of art with hand-painted features and all handmade costumes, and they tell a great story of German restoration after World War II that Huguette Clarke was happy to help. And so this was...
It's interesting you bring it up, because I've been trying to study really and analyze how collecting developed in her life and where it was at certain points in her life, because it's one area that I think that, for example, Bill Dedman didn't have a lot of information on. And with the dolls, I think we're able to kind of better trace how she evolved as a collector and where it began. And we know the childhood. And it wasn't just a simple childhood where a girl had two dolls. She clearly had many dolls, was surrounded by playthings her entire childhood. Yes. Whether she was in Paris, to later on in Montana, where her father was the great copper baron.
In the mansion in New York.
And then the mansion in New York. The dolls were traced to all of these places. There seems to be a lapse, though. Now, I'm not saying she didn't collect, but I'm saying where dolls may have sort of fallen into a part of her life, but not the most important, passionate part of her life. And that was probably getting into her mid-20s, into her 40s. And this was a point she was still with her mother. She was living with her mother at this point on Fifth Avenue at the penthouse where they have the two top floors.
I think you're wrong. That's the Japanese doll period.
It could be, yes.
And that was, I believe, because of their many trips to Bellascardo. Mm-hmm. That's where she made contact with the G.T. Marsh Company in California, who were the 19th century importers of Asian arts. And she made contact with them, and many of the really fine Japanese dolls that she has were contracted from them. And in fact, the doll houses that she had made for her even later then, skipping up 1960, 1970, were done through Katarina Marsh, who was one of the descendants of the original Marsh family. And she found this wonderful artist in Japan, and I talk about this in another video, who created the dollhouses for her, and there's wonderful stories involved with that. So I think during all this time...
You've studied her Japanese doll period much more than I have. So that would fill in what I thought was a void. The Japanese dolls actually fill that void in, and that would have been the continuation.
Exactly.
There's no doubt that in the 1950s, though, this was a pivotal moment in her collecting life. Her mother died, I believe, in 1953, and Huguette was suddenly alone. As you recall, if you've read the book, her sister, her only sister, Andrée, died when she was, I believe, 16 or 17.
The sister was.
The sister was, and Huguette was, I believe, at the time, like 9 or 10.
Yes.
And so obviously had an enormous effect on her. So when her mother died, she was suddenly left fairly alone as far as family. And the dolls then suddenly became a really important part of her life. And it began to evolve to the next level. That is, Huguette Clarke, the connoisseur, call it. Rather than the dolls being sort of a whimsy, she became a true connoisseur. And it began with, of course, the doll that would remain her most focused passion over the years as a collector, and it is...
the Bébé Triste.
And generally, the beautiful Jumeau.
The beautiful Jumeau, yes.
And talk about this a little bit and her connection with Jumeau.
What I think we should do is step to the side now and let's start showing the dolls and talking about those. So as we can give examples of her love for the dolls as we talk about them and pinpoint certain ones, because really...
This whole time I thought they wanted to look at us,
no,
not the dolls.
They don't want to see.
I can't believe that.
They don't want to see
right.
us. They want
Let's
to see the dolls.
step over to the side. And,
you can keep right on talking, and they can be looking at the dolls. Come on.